Welcome to Name Takes, a podcast about the cultures of naming, from the names of streets to buildings, to people and beyond. What are the stories behind certain names? And what causes do specific names promote? Where can the roots of one name or other be found? Could these be invented? In Name Takes, we include artists' voices and cases from the art field. Because in art, meaning-making is central. And most of all, because art helps us formulate better questions about the present.
Thank you for listening. My name is Sofía Hernández Chong Cuy, and this is episode 8 of Name Takes, a podcast by Kunstinstituut Melly. On this episode, we have writer Mary Wang interviewing the artist Jun Yang. The artist has created a number of projects and exhibitions that crack open ideas of authorship and authenticity embedded in our discourse. Using his name as a departure point for developing this work, Jun invites us to rethink originality, signature style, branding, all of which are concepts intertwined with art and naming. As a note, this is one of 6 episodes of Name Takes that ends with a personal story behind the artist's own name.
Phew, we're here.
All right.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I figured because you work so much with your own name as your material, I think I ought to start with asking you how you would like to be called.
Recently, most people could just call me Jun, which is the easiest name. But the reason why I don't mind to be called different versions of the name and is basically because I think of the Chinese language. It's about the character of your name that matters much more than the pronunciation. Because, the people in Guangzhou would pronounce it differently than people in Beijing, in Shanghai, etc., etc. So I got used to that there isn't an authentic, correct version of it. There is only translated versions of the whole thing.
Yeah, that's a very interesting response you just gave me, because I used to work in public radio, and one of the things I was instructed to do with every new guest that we had at the station is to first ask them, how would you like me to pronounce your name? I mean, I've gone back and forth on this question because on the one hand, I understand that, when you are broadcasting someone's voice over an entire region or an entire country, you want to make sure to pronounce their name correctly. But over time, I've also sometimes experienced it as an exoticizing question, because if someone was called, Jane Smith, that question wouldn't come up. So I never know whether to ask the question or not.
I look at it from a perspective of different social versions of yourself, let's say, or culture versions of yourself. Being in German, I, of course, be here in Austria, I speak, of course, with most people in a daily life in German language. And therefore, everything is pronounced also differently. So even my name is being pronounced differently, because when people read it, it's J-U-N, and that's in German, Jun. But I don't mind it. I look at it like almost like one translation of the persona that I am, as much as the different personalities that you have anyway in yourself, being looked at from different various points in wherever you are or in what context you are.
So should we settle for June then, for now?
Yeah, perfect. Yes, wonderful.
Okay, so June.
Yes.
Can you start by introducing yourself and your work?
My name is Jun Yang, and I was born in China, in mainland China. A town called Qintian might not say a lot for other people, but it's quite interesting, the city in context of the Chinese diaspora in Austria and Europe. So it's a city called Jintian in the province Zhejiang, which is south of Shanghai. I was born there, but my family moved to Austria in the late 70s. When I was 4, I came to Austria. And I grew up in Vienna, in Austria. I went to high school, primary school, etc. there. But for the last 10 years, I've been living a lot of my time in Taipei, in Taiwan, and also in Japan. So I've split my time between the 3 cities, between Taipei, Japan, Yokohama, and Vienna. So that would be, let's say, my cultural background. And to my work, I would say I've been within this contemporary art circus and working within the contemporary art field for more than 20 years. Yes, and a lot of works have been dealing with the connotation of the name or the context of the name. Yes.
So let's start then with your poster series, Jun Yang, Looking for Jun Yang. Was that the first time that you used your name as raw material, or did that come much earlier?
Well, the whole thing started with having a name Jun Yang, which I think is a very simple name. Having this name that people quite often mispronounce or misspelled the name or pronounce it in various variations. And then I get constantly letters, anything with my name misspelled. So I started to collect these sort of envelopes or letters or things where my name was misspelled, or even including exhibition catalogs. So instead of being, let's say, upset or maybe angry or whatever, I thought they were funny. They were quite funny because I didn't feel I was addressed, but it was almost like a parallel reality, somebody else with a similar name and similar biography. So this is one of the, let's say, background stories. But maybe the first piece was produced in 2001, and it was produced for the Manifesta in Frankfurt at that time, the Manifesta 4. And it was a piece called Jun Yang meets Jun Yang and Soldier Woods. That would be the English version. In German, it would be called Jun Yang und Soldat Holzer. In French, it would be called Jun Yang et Soldat du Bois, etc. So it would be sort of Soldier Woods in English would be almost like a mistransferred or translated version of Jun Yang. Yang means a willow tree, and Jun, a different version of Jun, would mean soldier. So my name would be Soldier Woods. Of course, growing up in Austria with a rather small Southeast Asian Chinese community, this name was always exotic. There was always something exotic projected to you because people had never heard the name before. But in fact, it's a very common name in China. The connotation of my own name being something exotic, being something different, being something that was very hard to put into a context. What does it mean? What does Jun mean? What does Yang mean? People had never heard of it before. But then I did a video work that was dealing with the origins of my name, and in fact about the translation. What would be an equivalent of Jun Yang in Germany, in France, or in the US or in England, etc. And so the conclusion was then it could be a very common name. And being a very common name, it would have produced a very different association when people call me, etc., etc. So this was the work. The work was about these sort of different versions of the name. And then I was interested because our name always expresses something special. You know, children call themselves by their names. Children would say, oh, you know, me, Peter, I have to go to the toilet or whatever. Peter is hungry or whatever. So you identify yourself. Your whole identity is so much connected to your name. So we grew up with identifying with almost like a uniqueness that is connected to your name, but also to our own identity. But it's obviously that we are not that unique, and there are millions of Mary Wang and millions of Jun Yang out there. So it was a series of posters where I invited designers to collaborate with me, and they would produce a poster. The first one was produced with an Austrian designer called Erwin Bauer, and he produced a series of posters looking for people with the same spelling of the name.
Right. So this was the poster series Jun Yang Looking for Jun Yang, which I think started in 2006. I think it's really interesting how this project very much started on a very individual level, which is about the different misspellings of your name and what that might say about the perception of your identity. But then as you moved on to this poster series and later on to your exhibition in Guangzhou, it actually started to become much more collective.
Right. Well, of course, the first poster series was started in France and then also in Germany. But then when I was invited in Guangzhou at the Times Museum in 2015, I proposed that we said, let's find people with the same name, Jun Yang, and let's meet them. So the idea for the exhibition was that only a group photograph of 5 people, Jun Yang meets Jun Yang, by the artist Jun Yang, would be hanging in the exhibition space. It wasn't, so we did have photographs, but it wasn't about a performative action of these 5 people walking around maybe or anything. But I proposed that we'll have a dinner and meet for coffee and just exchange as a genuine, as a real thing that I wanted to meet. You know, it's like finding people with the very same interest that you have, maybe, or etc. And the artwork itself wasn't the meeting itself. It wasn't the performance sitting in a restaurant or anything, but it was just a group photograph hanging in the museum. And the fact that it wasn't clear who out of the 5 would be the artist who created this work or initiated this project. And I liked that as well. I liked this aspect that it wasn't clear if maybe all of them were the artist, or which one was the artist. Was it the woman standing next to me, etc., or anything? So I liked that idea because it negated even not only the uniqueness of that person called Jun Yang, but it also negated the uniqueness of an artist himself, and which is absolutely the foundation of contemporary, not contemporary, but anyway, of the idea of the artist as a genius, the artist as a unique one, as a brand, as you know, etc., as something, yeah, absolutely special, let's say. So that specialness was taken away, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because working as an artist or any person who is authoring a work on their own, there's often this expectation that your biography or the experiences you've gone through in your own history, in your own memory, somehow shape or inform the work that is being produced. And it's almost as if you are flipping this concept on its head by taking it very, very literally, by saying it is my name that, due to its commonness, negates this singularity that has caused me to produce all of these works, even though, of course, many of your other works don't directly address the issue of the name.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Yeah. Yes. I mean, it went further then. It went further, and for the last few years, I've been working on a series of solo exhibitions. Even the word solo as a single entity. It's, let's say, in a classical, conceptual, classical understanding, it's a celebration of that one single person. Even though we as artists do not exist in a bubble completely by ourselves. We work with other people, we have assistants, we have production, blah, 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 etc., etc. But nevertheless, the art world still lives with this myth, let's say, of the the uniqueness, the signature by the artist, that one who produces it, or the genius artist who has this great idea and therefore transforms that work by his inspirational, whatever great idea thing. So we became very much aware that if we produce a series of solo exhibitions in big museums, that we need to challenge that as well. So therefore, then this series of exhibition became also moving away from an individual artistic production. It became also a project questioning the singleness of a solo exhibition, questioning this system, sort of like institutional issue connected to such an exhibition. Yeah.
Right. So these were 3 exhibitions, right? If I remember correctly, there was the overview perspective.
The overview perspective, which started in Art Sonje in Korea, this was 2018, and within the overview perspective, it was it's a term that is related to a notion when astronauts leave planet Earth and the orbit, they look back at planet Earth and then they suddenly realize, how beautiful Earth is or whatever, and we should be all in peace and etc. But I like this notion of me creating an exhibition, which is a solo exhibition, and therefore also looking from outside at this entire project. So that's why it was called Overview Perspective. Then it moved to the Kunsthaus Graz in 2019, and then in the end it moved to Taipei. But at each of the station, the exhibition, even though it was sort of like one traveling, it was translated, but it also transferred. It changed. It changed basically. It changed in its conceptual. It moved on within its conceptual idea. In Korea, it was only my work, but in Graz, I invited all the artists, many artists, designers that I work with, collaborators. So therefore, the solo exhibition became almost became also a group exhibition. The solo exhibition became a collaborative project with other artists participating in. And the last station was in Taiwan, where the exhibition moved further into the city by having 3 exhibitions in the one city at the same time. So it was at the same time parallel an exhibition at the Mokka Taipei, at Guangdong Museum, and at the TKG Plus Project Gallery. So it was one exhibition in 3 venues. And because of one exhibition in 3 venues, I could much more talk about the venues. Let's say if you have the same piece of work in 3 different museums or different locations, it means always something else. It means something else in a gallery, it means something in a city museum with its own structure, or the Museum Guangdong, which is part of a university campus. So I was interested in moving away, therefore, much more from the singularity of a solo exhibition. And of course, I mean, there's lots to explain about each of the stations, and one of the main aspects of that project was a name work, yeah.
Which were the names that were your name that was mounted on the facades of the venues.
Yes, so in Korea we did not do that, but once it moved to Graz, Graz is the 2nd biggest city in Austria. It's a beautiful like historic city, but then you have this very contemporary architecture by Peter Cook and Fournier, and a building that was built in 2003 that looks like they call it an alien. It looks like a spaceship in the middle of this historical city center. And on that building, we decided to put on the facade with huge red letters my name in Chinese letters. So in Graz, first of all, we did this as to sort of like not trick, but lure or play with this expectation of a solo exhibition. It's a solo exhibition, therefore the name of the artist is almost the most important thing. To expectation of this is therefore the person we see the exhibition. But once you went into the exhibition, the first piece you would see, the first artwork you would see is that group photograph of 5 Jun Yangs, which negates almost the uniqueness of that name outside. So this was very important for us to have this sort of balance. But then also it means something. It means all these other things, which mean with a Chinese name written in Chinese Hanzi, in simplified Chinese in red color. It looks like almost like propaganda. But then it also looks, if you go around in Shanghai or in Chinese big cities, that on a lot of apartment, sort of like high-rise apartment blocks, you have the apartment block name written on big letters. They're almost like advertisings. So there was something between propaganda. But then also PR and advertising about having the name in huge letters outside. But then, of course, on the other hand, also people thought, wow, what is this? What's going on? There's a Chinese artist taking over this museum. And in fact, even at City Hall, the right wing, of course, always the right wing party, they even questioned or asked the cultural commissioner, why are not more Austrian artists being exhibited at the Kunsthaus? Which is of course ironic, because I've been living in Austria for more than 40 years. I have an Austrian passport. I completely identify myself with this city, etc., etc. So just having their names on that building, of course, people expected, oh my God, there's a Chinese artist taking over. So it was also a play or a hint on these cultural expectations of, in fact, me being an Austrian artist, but exhibiting there and putting on purpose this sort of misleading, let's say, yeah.
I didn't know that that had happened, but it also doesn't surprise me. But it also makes me wonder, on the other side of that, when you exhibit your work in China, displaying your Chinese name, or at least the pinyin spelling of your Chinese name, is there also a certain expectation of who you're supposed to be as a Chinese artist, or at least an artist with a Chinese name?
Well, I think yes, absolutely, because people do still think this is a Chinese or a Southeast Asian artist. I've somewhere an email. I was at one. I mean, that's also a long time ago. I was disinvited or really again excluded from exhibition because again they thought, oh no, we don't want any Chinese artists to be in the exhibition, and it was. And it was based on how the name would sounded in the whole list.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I didn't know that. What is this story?
Well, it was I think for the Prague Biennial, long time ago. I forgot. Yeah, a long time ago, and they wanted to have some more Austrian artists in there. And I was proposed by somebody to say, well, we have this artist who is interesting, blah blah blah, and they basically said it in a very, let's say, friendly term that they would prefer some more Austrian artists.
Wow.
Well, yes.
I guess this leads us to to talk a bit more about your using of not just your name, but also your autobiography in your work.
Yes.
The way that you also incorporate your autobiography both as a singular experience, but also one that is both shared and almost archetyped or stereotyped. Yeah. Could you talk a bit more about that?
Well, of course. I did one work, maybe that fits into it within the context of biography. It's called Becoming European, or How I Grew Up with Wiener Schnitzel. Which is the Austrian national dish, which is veal that is fried, etc. Anyway, so it's a work that deals with the idea that my parents moved to Europe. They wanted to get out of China, out of the Cultural Revolution, and they ended up in Austria. They didn't choose Austria, in fact. It was based on coincidence and chance and etc. and the possibility to leave China in the 70s, which wasn't that given. But at that one point, they had planned to go to Belgium because we had relatives there, etc. But we couldn't get the papers for Belgium. So my parents had, in fact, actually planned that their children would grow up in Belgium. So, and I was interested in, there is here a parallel reality, a path which we would have taken. And if we had taken that path, I would be sitting here speaking today with maybe a Belgian accent instead of a German accent. I would have had Moule Frites, mussels with French fries instead of Wiener Schnitzel. I would have gone swimming in the North Sea instead of going skiing. It's a decision, of course, my parents didn't think too much about in this sense, because to them it was important to get out of China. It wasn't important for them to think like, oh, what does it mean that my son will grow up being an Austrian or Belgian, which is a huge, of course, difference. So I was interested in making a work on this, and this piece is about it. But in one part, in the final piece, or in the video, I say, when people ask me where I'm from, I really sometimes say I'm Chinese. I even sometimes say I am Japanese because I live in Japan. I sometimes say I'm from Taiwan. I sometimes say I'm Austrian, of course. And I sometimes say I'm from Vienna, from Europe, etc. And I say in the video that I do not say all these things not to make myself more exotic or special, but I say all these things to disrupt the cultural connotation, the connotation of what it means to be a Chinese or a Japanese. I say these things to disrupt the expectations of them, me being, because maybe the way my hair or how I dress, that I'm Japanese instead of Chinese. And I think this disruption and this rupture is important. That it's not affirmative, but it's a moment for them to rethink why, I could be from all these cultural places.
Is this also the video where you interspersed these images from Chinatowns in the US?
That's a video called Coming Home, Daily Structures of Life. And that deals with my experience of growing up in a Chinese restaurant. My parents, when they moved to Austria, they had a Chinese restaurant. And I was interested because, of course, this Chinese restaurant in the 1980s, as in many places, was very abstract. It had very little to do with, let's say, with China, Chinese China or anything. But it was an image of an image of an image. But I thought this was the authentic image. So of course I thought, because I grew up in there. So I thought these dishes that you had, which have, abstractly something vaguely to do something with Chinese dishes or Chinese cuisine, I thought they were authentic, of course. So it deals with this sort of, misunderstanding of your own identity. Yes. And because of that, the video consists of Chinatown scenes or Chinese restaurant scenes in Hollywood movies, like Rush Hour, Lethal Weapon, etc., of these depictions.
It's interesting because I myself accidentally ended up in the Netherlands.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was not where my parents intended to go or had hoped to go. I think, for them, as for a lot of Chinese people, their ultimate goal is to reach America, which is where I am based now. We left in the 90s. There was certainly a big saturation of images of Chinese immigrants in the US. And I think that very much defined how they thought this experience would be. And then they ended up in the Netherlands, which is like the entire country is as big as one city in China. And, people eat the strangest foods and wear the strangest clothes that they never saw on TV.
All right. So you grew up in the Netherlands, huh?
Yes, I did.
Wonderful. Yes.
And to speak about autobiography a bit more, I know you also co-edited or co-wrote a book titled Autobiography for Thames and Hudson.
Yes.
In which you research other artists using kind of similar strategies in their work. I wonder whether you could talk a bit more about that, and also whether you place yourself within any of the genealogies that you've investigated.
It's quite a long time ago. It was 2003. We published in 2003, 2004. So I have to recall some of the aspects of that project. it started that Thames and Hudson started a series called Artworks, and it was a series of different books where they wanted, the idea was an artist and the curator or museum director would work together on one book thematically of contemporary art. They asked Barbara Steiner, who is, she used to be the director of Kunsthaus Graz and is currently the director of Bauhaus Dessau in Germany. And we worked on many projects together, but also on this book, Autobiography. It was up to us to come up with a thematic book for this series. And we thought it would be interesting to think within the notion of biography and having artworks by the artist that deal with their own sort of story of biography. When we worked on the book, the publisher wanted us to call the book Identity, because they thought it would be sexier, of course, to sell a book called Identity than Autobiography. And we had a long discussion and trying to convince them that no, we'd like to have the idea of this act of writing or being aware of the artist making works about their own biography and this moment of self-reflection on works.
I would like to ask, what do you think a name is or does? What's the purpose of a name? What does it do for you?
May I? I haven't. I would like to just mention one thing, and then we can go to this topic. Is that fine?
Oh yes, of course.
I thought because we were talking about the series of solo exhibitions with the name on the building. So I thought I'd like to finish that, because of course in Austria the connotation was, oh my God, there's a Chinese artist now taking over our lovely, beautiful art center here in town, and where are all the other Austrian artists? But when it moved to Taiwan, we had, of course, like I mentioned, we had three different venues. One was the Mocha Museum, built in the 20s under the Japanese rule as a Japanese school. Then after the Second World War, that building became City Hall. And then from 2000 something, it became then a contemporary art museum. So having therefore a name that is in simplified Chinese, almost suggesting a mainland Chinese artist on this political building itself, I thought was an interesting sort of conversation with the building. But we did then a third thing, which was the name June, that was missing some strokes. It looked like as if it was taken down or it wasn't half finished. And there was a hint to the idea that this solo exhibition is also a group exhibition, that this one single persona is also being dismantled. We found an artist living in San Francisco with the same name.
I found that person too when I Googled you. When I Googled Jun Yang artist, that's who I find.
He's originally from Korea, from South Korea, but now based in San Francisco, and he's a painter. And of course, his notion of contemporary art is rather different to what I produce or what my work deals with. But it's interesting. So I called him, I contacted him, and I said, I would like you to participate in my solo exhibition, but because it's the same name, it's also therefore your solo exhibition. And I would like to show your work, your paintings in this exhibition. So it only said as well, it just said painting, the name of the painting, and Jun Yang. And so this confused, of course, people. And I like the idea that this exhibition confused the classical understanding of the singularity, the uniqueness and the sort of like signature, or, like art always produces something like a visual signature that, this is obviously a Picasso, a Van Gogh or whatever. And this is therefore you need to create your own brand identity. And by inviting a second Jun Yang, it also negates your own brand identity in this context. as an artist. Even at the press conference, we were both standing there. We invited him over with and showing his work in the exhibition, but also writing about the other Jun Yang artist. And it never said, "Oh, this is the other Jun Yang artist." It said in exhibition with the titling Jun Yang. So he was invited.
That's amazing.
And in fact, when I had this idea or this thought, I talked to a few people, and then a few people, of course, their reaction was, "Are you sure you want to do this? Because this is also, you're making, you almost negate your own identity, you weaken your own uniqueness." And I thought, no, this is exactly what this exhibition should be about. I would like the idea that people sort of confuse, therefore, who is who. And it's a challenge to anything that is called, let's say, authentic or authenticity, because it produces different versions of it, yes.
And then also, since so much of your work deals with the persona of Jun Yang, the artist, I wonder how big the gap is between the persona of the artist of Jun Yang and Jun Yang, the person, and whether you do anything to manage that gap.
Well, for instance, with a project that almost overstresses that one single persona, the artist person, I'm quite aware that, and I've also, decided that I'm not producing any works for the time being, and also for the near future. It's not that I'm retiring anything. You can't really retire as an artist. We're not football players or athletes. You can't really retire. So it's silly to say I'm retiring. But for me, it was also therefore a very strong, statement or setting. And from that, I decided that I won't be doing any exhibitions for the near future. So so I can focus more on different aspects of artistic production, or looking at various other settings.
So is it because you feel that you've done so much around the persona already?
Yes, kind of. You've done so much about the persona, and also overexposed, therefore, this idea of the conflict between between the plural and the singular, and I thought the right thing to do was therefore almost pull out or retreat, and therefore retreat and not produce any artworks or exhibitions for the time being.
So what are you spending your time on instead?
Well, I can write still a lot of things. I wrote a children's book.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yes, I wrote a children's book, which is also, it deals also with contemporary art, of course. But you could also say, because it's because of moving away from, let's say, from the whole exhibition project, therefore, was also a shift from, let's say, the individual artistic practice. And it moved into a much more system institutional, critical project. It was questioning the artist as a brand. Having finished this project, and I felt it's something that it came to a conclusive part, let's say. I was then asked by some of my colleagues at the Vienna Secession. It's an art association. It's in fact one of the oldest art centers and art association. They asked me to join the board of directors. So I've joined from last year the Vienna Secession as part of the board. And it's interesting because, like I mentioned, I was interested in moving from a situation of much more systematic institutional issues and questions. And to me, it is an artistic statement being part of an art center. So it does not produce a classical artwork, of course, by sitting within a group of people and deciding who has the art exhibitions. Or we initiated a charity fundraising for Doctors Without Borders in reaction to the Ukraine war, where a lot of many artists have donated artworks, and we hope we can raise a very nice amount for Doctors Without Borders. So it's something like this, and I see it. I see it equally as an important artistic contribution, or even the word artistic is maybe whatever, but as a very important cultural contribution that I can participate in. And I moved away, therefore, from this classical individual production mode.
So, to return to the subject of names, what do you think a name is or does?
At the very beginning, when you asked me how would I like to be addressed, and I said, well, in fact, I don't mind people calling me different names, because again, I think we live in a society where everything needs to be understood easier, quicker. Things shouldn't be too complex and complicated. We want everything to be easily understood. TikTok is a few seconds. Instagram is only these sort of pictures. Facebook is stories, etc. Twitter is stories. So we want everything to be quite simple to be understood. And that goes as equally for a brand, for an artist. Van Gogh is the guy cutting off his ears and painting like this. Picasso is this one, and etc. etc. And definitely more interested in more complex sort of situations and of definitions of things. I'm not interested in reducing myself to a single name. And because of that, I'm more than happy when people address me differently, or when they pronounce it in their own sort of language or cultural context, how they would pronounce my name.
Thank you for listening. Name Takes is a podcast produced by Kunstinstituut Melly in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. Sarah Demeuse and Mary Wang conducted the artist interviews in episodes 5 to 10 of Name Takes. Each of these episodes is introduced by Sofía Hernández Chong Cuy. Judith Scholz is the voice talent of the original music. The podcast sound, mixing and original music, has been developed by Jan Pohl at Okapi Recordings in Rotterdam. The audio files were mastered by Masterenzo Mastering. Production management was overseen by Wendy van Slagmaat Bos, and communication and marketing by Jeroen Lavèn. The graphic design of Name Takes is by Wooseok Jang from Orange Slice Type, who participated in CLIP, an arts education program of Kunstinstituut Melly. This episode was realized thanks to a grant from the Prins Bernhard Fund. Name Takes has also been realized thanks to a grant from a donor who wishes to remain unnamed. Kunstinstituut Melly thanks them for their support, and also gives special thanks to the participating artists for sharing their experiences, projects and insights to listeners of Name Takes.